Well, thanks for being here, and welcome to Seattle CityClub's District 2 City Council debate. I'm Preston Phillips, a moderator with Como TV, Channel 4 here in Seattle. With me are Viana Davila and Seattle Times, and David Croman with KCTS Crosscut. So, we'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, Amazon, our supporting sponsor, AARP, and our host sponsor, of course, Rainier Arts Center, for making this debate possible this evening, the first of many. And now, please welcome our Seattle City Council District 2 candidates, Tammy Morales and Mark Solomon. Thank you for being here tonight. Welcome.
Hello, thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
So we will begin the debate with 90-second opening statements by each candidate. And then we'll move into a question and answer round where candidates will have 60 seconds to respond. And after this, each candidate will have an opportunity to ask one question of each other, where each candidate will have 30 seconds to ask and 60 seconds to respond. We'll finish the debate with a 90-second closing statement by each candidate. And candidates, your responses, as we've talked about, will be timed, and we will cut you off if you go over your time. We really will. And we also ask the audience, please hold all your applause until the end of the debate, just so we can keep things going, because we do have a lot of questions. And we're going to start with Mark Solomon to give us your opening statement, because Mark, if you didn't know this, won a coin toss, and he gets to go first tonight. So, Mark, if you will go ahead, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you very much. I appreciate everyone being here tonight. My name is Mark Solomon, and I'm running to serve you on Seattle City Council because I want to get things done for the people of District 2. The reason is simple. This is my home. I was born and raised here. I live on Beacon Hill in the home that my grandparents built. And I feel fortunate that I live there with my wife, because if it wasn't for the fact that my grandparents have worked hard, my grandfather worked 26 years, 2 jobs for 26 years to provide for his family. And if it wasn't for their foresight, I couldn't afford to live there. And I think about that. I think how fortunate I am, especially when I think about the neighbors that I've come into contact with over my years as a crime prevention coordinator and as a candidate. When I talk to a family friend who says they had to sell the family home because they couldn't keep up with property taxes. When I talk to my vet who says that none of her staff, even though she's right down there, right off of Rainier Avenue, none of her staff can afford to live in the city. And I think we've got to be able to do something better. So I want to go to City Council to effect positive change for the people who live in this district. We have incredible challenges, and we have incredible opportunities to make things better, and I want to use my skills, my experience, my knowledge, and the partnerships that I've built over the years to effect policy change to improve quality of life in this community.
Thank you, Mark. Tammy?
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. I'm Tammy Morales, and I was raised by strong women who taught me that you do what you have to do to take care of your family, and you speak up for what you believe in. That's why I've always fought for economic justice, and why I've always fought for worker rights, and always demanded that we treat all of our neighbors with dignity and respect. I'm running to represent Seattle District 2 on City Council so we can build power for our voices in our community, so that we can be involved in the decisions about how our neighborhoods change and grow. I'm running because I believe that we can dream big and make this city work for everyone. I believe the time for incrementalism is over, and we must act with urgency to create the kind of world that we want for ourselves and for our children and for our children's children. I believe we can shift power to the people of this city. I am not worried about government taxing multinational corporations in Seattle. I'm worried about corporations taking over our local government. And I believe that we can build more affordable housing, more senior housing, and more community-centered development so that we can end displacement in the city. We can build a Green New Deal for Seattle and create thousands of jobs for our people. We can stop criminalizing poverty. We can dismantle the structural racism that exists in our city departments. We can do these things, even if they're hard, but we have to start with an ambitious vision for how to make our city work for everyone. I can't do this alone, so I'm here tonight to ask for your support so we can get this work done together. Thank you.
And thank you, Tammy. Now we will begin our question round. Each candidate will have 60 seconds to answer, and we're kind of changing things up a little bit because we did get some great questions from the audience tonight. We're going to start with this one, and Mark, I want you to answer first because we're kind of taking turns as we go down the list here. But this weekend, as many of you know, there was a shooting at the Westlake light rail station around 9:30 Friday evening. Everybody's heard of it by now. Man goes down there, gets in some kind of fight, an altercation. One person shot dead, one person shot in critical condition, one person's taken to the hospital in stable condition. This is 9:30 down by this area. Now the suspect's finally taken into custody with the help of some local police departments are really getting that video and those pictures out there. But the question that comes from the audience member tonight, if you are elected to this city council, please tell us how you would work with Metro, Sound Transit, Seattle Police, and the King County Sheriff's Office to ensure these places are safe places to go.
One thing we need to do is increase our staffing levels for the police department. When I look at the fact that our population has grown from 1970 to now by about 215,000, yet the aggregate number of police officers we have only grown by less than 200. We need to increase our staffing so that we can provide for better security throughout our communities. Not only that, we need to make sure that we have enough resources to respond to our priority one calls, to do more proactive policing, to do more relational policing, and really work on reducing our violence in our community. One of the ways I want to reduce violence in our community is to fund those organizations and agencies that are providing, those community-based agencies that are providing resources right now, working with young people. We need to work more closely with our different law enforcement entities throughout the community.
Tammy?
So it's always tragic when there are any sort of violence, especially if there is a death involved, and it affects all of us. It affects the witnesses, the community, as well as the people who are actually involved in the violence. We have passed, in Seattle and in the state of Washington, have passed some really important safe storage laws to make sure that we are disrupting the black market for guns, and I think that that is a huge part of the problem. Guns are everywhere, and we have to do what we can to increase their security and to make sure that we are advocating for more responsible gun ownership. One of the things I would like to see is that we pass a gun tracing law, because there are a lot of incidents where people make straw purchases, so they buy a gun for somebody who is not authorized to have one. And I would also like to see us have some sort of judicial review that removes firearms for people who have, for example, written a manifesto, so that we are getting the guns off the street and disrupting that market. The other thing that we also need to do is make sure that we are investing in the kind of violence interruption programs that can serve our communities better.
Thank you, Tammy.
Okay, I'm going to shift over to homelessness now, and Tammy, you'll answer this question first. The city and county's proposed regional homelessness authority could have a budget of more than $130 million. Do you support this plan? Do you think the city and county need to spend more on reducing homelessness? Yeah, start there.
Well, we all know that on any given night, there's about 6,000 people who are sleeping on the street. Meanwhile, we have 14 billionaires who live in the county. So this isn't a question of where we're going to get the money. We know that we need to advocate for more money. We need about $214 million a year just to build housing for the chronically homeless. That's just for the permanently supportive housing that we need in order to support these folks. So yes, I think we, in terms of the authority itself, this new entity, this is a regional problem. It's a national problem, but it is going to demand a regional response. So while I am hopeful that this new entity is able to start to address the issues and find the resources that we need in order to build those housing units, I think it is going to be really important for us to pay attention to who gets to make decisions there, and that there is some stronger oversight. I know there are a lot of folks in smaller cities and municipal cities around the county who are worried that it is a little too Seattle-centric in terms of the power of this entity.
All right, thank you, Tammy.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
Mark?
Mark?
Please repeat the question.
Sure. So the city and county, they're coming together to form a regional homelessness authority. So do you support that plan? And do you also think the city and county need to be spending more on reducing homelessness than maybe what they're proposing to spend in that plan and what they're already spending now?
It is a regional problem, and it does require a regional approach. And so the city and the county coming together to address this and working with the different partners throughout the community is the right approach. In terms of the spending that going forward, let's look at the fact that there are communities and organizations that are willing to step up and are willing to partner. So in addition to the funds that the city and the county have provided, let's work in partnership with our faith communities. Let's work in partnership with our business communities to provide the funding that we need to provide those wraparound services and get people into permanent housing and help them transition from being on the street into more stable and safe conditions.
So just to clarify, do you see that as meaning maybe that the other entities should be spending more? I just want to make sure I understand.
No, what I'm saying is that, yes, the city and the county need to spend, but I'm also looking at how we partner with others in the community for additional resources to provide the services that people need.
And do you believe the city should continue its accelerated policy of removing homeless encampments? And this question goes to Tammy again first.
You were looking at him, is it?
To Tammy, yes.
Okay, sorry. So the question is, I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. Do you believe the city should continue its accelerated policy of removing homeless encampments?
No, I don't. I am a former Seattle Human Rights Commissioner, and we've been very vocal about the fact that removing people from one side of the street to the other is not only inhumane, it is a waste of city resources. Anybody you talk to who has observed one of these removals happening, I was talking to some business owners down in Georgetown who say that this doesn't work. People are back 2 hours later. Rather than spending money on that, we should be investing that money into expanding the LEAD program, which actually supports people moving into services, moving into shelter beds if they're available, transitional housing if it's available. I think there are better ways for us to spend that staff time, better ways for us to spend those resources that will actually start to get to the root causes of why people are homeless in the first place, and make sure that we are using that money wisely and respecting people's humanity and dignity in the meantime.
Having been to the encampment, having walked in there, having been around those who are living in RVs that are not fit for human habitation, leaving them in those conditions is not humane. We need to move people into places that are safe and provide them with wraparound services immediately so they can change their homeless circumstance. So what you refer to as sweeps, I refer to as outreach. And when you refer to we need to do LEAD as opposed to the navigation team, realize that law enforcement assisted diversion, the navigation team is providing a lot of those referrals to people to help them change their circumstance. Realizing that law enforcement is making those contacts to help people move out of those circumstances. So yes, we need to provide more services. We need to provide more supportive housing. We need to provide more outreach. But leaving people where they are and not providing services or housing is not humane.
Well, I want to follow that up with Tammy, a specific question for you. You've said that you oppose any more encampments, cleanups, but there are some that receive 72-hour notice. There's two kinds. There's the immediate cleanups and there's the 72-hour cleanups. Do you think one type of removal has a value or a place in the city? Would you support 72-hour cleans over the ones that are faster, happening a lot quicker, and that have really intensified in the last year?
Look, we need to understand that while there are protocols that are supposed to be getting followed, the mayor is shortening the timeline for these notices repeatedly, right? So we've started with, I think it started with 4 or 5 days, and then it went to 72 hours, and then it was 48 hours. Sometimes they're getting removed with 30 minutes notice. The reality is that that program doesn't work. And while somebody might be obstructing a path, and in that particular case, maybe there's reason to help people find other services, our own South Precinct Captain Grossman, has trained his officers in lead because he has acknowledged that we're not going to arrest our way out of the homeless problem. We're not going to solve any of these crises by just moving people. And to your point, Mark, it is not true that the navigation teams are referring people. There was a report recently that said that those referrals are down. All that is happening right now is people are getting pushed from one side of the street to the other, and that's our own city reporting on how those navigation teams are working. It is not a humane way to treat people, and if we really want to serve them, we need to increase permanent supportive housing and the wraparound services, expand lead so that people get access to the services they really need.
All right, thank you, Tammy. Next question is for Mark, and I'm going to say this. Would you have supported the head tax on businesses to fund more homeless services and housing? And do you support additional taxes of any kind for these services? And if so, what kind?
No, I did not support the head tax. And the reason that I didn't support it is because even though there was a plan, I was concerned about the accountability of how that money was going to be spent. What I favor is looking at where we're already spending our existing funds, making sure that we have good accountability for those funds, and putting those resources towards those efforts that we know work. Outreach works. Case management works. Let's invest in those first. And when it comes to looking for additional resources, rather than going to the tax well, I'm looking at public-private partnerships. What can we do working together, working with folks in our community? As I said, working with our faith communities, working with our business communities, many of whom are willing to step in and step up to assist. Let's work in partnership. I think that's a better way for us to get it done.
Tammy, do you mean to ask the question again? Or?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So the question is, would you have supported the head tax on businesses to fund more homeless services and housing? And do you support additional taxes of any kind for these services? And if so, what kind?
Sure. Yes, I did support the employee hours tax, and as did every council member, until millions of dollars were spent against it. That was spent by large corporations who didn't want to pay it to defeat the tax, and they did it with a misinformation campaign. This is important. There are people dying on our streets because we don't have the resources. And while it's great that we might have some philanthropy, philanthropy is not accountable to the government, it's not accountable to taxpayers, and we can't simply rely on public-private partnerships to solve this problem. This is the role of government. It is the role of the public sector to find solutions and to make the investment that's needed to make sure that the most vulnerable people in our community are protected. So I would definitely say that we need to have this conversation again. I think there is going to be, we're a growing city. We can't keep funding the infrastructure expansion, the maintenance on our existing infrastructure, the needs that we have with a growing population of poor people. We can't keep funding that on the backs of working folks with increased property tax and increased levies for everything we need. We have to find progressive revenue in the city, and that's the first place to start.
Thank you, Tammy.
And real quick before I move on to the next question, when you say we need to have this discussion again, are you referring to a discussion about the head tax or an employee hours tax?
Yes, and other sources of revenue. I'm also interested in looking at a vacancy tax, in a real estate speculation tax, at impact fees, depending on, if there are, what the particular projects are. I don't have all the answers right now, but we have to have that conversation, and we have to figure out what the best mix of alternative revenue options are so that we move in a more progressive direction.
And because I just gave Tammy a few seconds to talk about it, are there, other than private public partnerships, are there other revenue sources that the city should try and tap into, Mark?
Definitely. One of the things that the city is looking at right now is bonding against our sales tax revenue, which will generate at least $50 million that we can put towards housing. Additionally, one of the things that I've been advocating for since May, I believe, is investment in a public bank, so that we can borrow against our own assets to build housing, not only permanent supportive housing, affordable housing, but workforce housing. So the resources are there that we can tap into. We need to be creative about how we do it, and we don't necessarily need to raise more taxes. We just need to be able to leverage our own, buying authority, our own spending authority.
Great. One point of disagreement that did come up around the debate around the employee hours tax was how that money should be spent had it actually remained. The mayor's office sort of put more priority on kind of short-term shelter. Some members of the council wanted to spend more of that money on long-term housing. This has been a debate we've been hearing more about. New York has a right to shelter law, which means the number of people actually living outside is relatively low, whereas Seattle has about 50% of its homeless population is living on the streets. LA is something like 75%. Given the city's limited resources, Mark, we'll start with you. What should the city's priority be? More immediate shelter or invest in long-term housing?
We need to do both. When we're talking about people who are in unsafe conditions, the primary thing we need to do is to get them someplace inside, get them safe, and provide them with wraparound services. At the same time, we need to build more housing. There's no question we have a housing shortage. We need more permanent supportive housing. We need more affordable housing. And as I mentioned before, we need more workforce housing. But the priority for the folks who are on the street right now, get them inside, get them safe, and provide them with the wraparound services they need, the case management they need to help them change their homeless circumstance.
Tammy.
Well, I do think that we need to make the long-term commitment to building housing, but that's going to take time. And so in the meantime, there are things we can do, like, the county is using a wing of the jail for turning that into a shelter. I think we have a youth jail that we could find another use for and possibly use that as a short-term shelter. So there are existing structures. There are lots of vacant buildings in different parts of the city that are sitting there with nothing happening in them. So I think there are things that we could do in the short term without having to make a huge investment in capital projects. But we're not going to solve the problem of homelessness for the chronically homeless or for folks who have just been evicted or victims of domestic violence or any of the other number of reasons why people become homeless until we start to build housing. Housing first is the strategy that we need to prioritize, whether we're talking about permanent supportive housing for those who are chronically homeless or just building more workforce housing and low-income housing for people who are poor.
Okay, this next question we'll start with Tammy first. District 2 includes SoDo, which has had an explosion of vehicular homelessness in recent years. The city only has one safe parking lot, which actually is not in SoDo, it's in the Ballard area, in conjunction with the church up there. And that lot doesn't allow RVs, and they make up the bulk of the campers in the SoDo area. People living in vehicles, particularly RVs, that can be very hard to house. Setting aside the mayor's proposed vehicle ranching legislation, what do you believe the city needs to do to better address vehicular homelessness? And again, starting with Tammy.
I think this is all part of the same conversation. We need people to have access. This is an income issue. If we're talking about homelessness, we're talking about people who are poor. We're talking about people who need assistance of some sort. And so rather than criminalize people and demonize them for being poor, we need to be finding ways for them to increase their income, get access to job training, get access to education. And yes, there are some folks for whom those are just not options, and they need assistance getting into shelters or in some sort of more permanent situation, more stable situation. But for those folks who are living in their cars or are living in RVs right now, that is their home. That is their one asset. And so it's important to honor their dignity and to make sure that we aren't just criminalizing them. We aren't just, telling their landlord or whoever it is that rented or sold them an RV that they have to, provide assistance for them. We have to actually make sure that people are safe. I would rather see those folks in a safe lot where they can get access to services until they get into a more stable situation.
Thank you.
You have to repeat the question.
Sure. Basically, there's a ton of vehicular homelessness all over the city, but it's
Right.
particularly pronounced in SoDo. There's only one safe lot left in the city,
Yeah, that's in Ballard.
and it does not allow RVs. So what are your thoughts about how to deal specifically with that population? Like, what do you believe the city needs to do better to address vehicular homelessness, setting aside the mayor's proposed vehicle ranching legislation?
we need to recognize that people living in their vehicles, that may be their only option. Right? So rather than shuffling folks around, let's find a place that they can actually go that may have services that they can tap into. One of the things that I've thought about is when a lot of the RVs are just dumping their gray water and black water into our sewer systems, that's a health and safety hazard for everybody in the community. So why don't we partner with somebody like Honey Bucket? Why don't we have a central location where people can come, they can have access to showers, restrooms, and disposal of their trash and their waste? We can set it up. We have properties in this city that are underused, underutilized, that we can tap into for those folks. But again, case management is going to be the key to help them move out of those circumstances, and housing.
So sort of shifting away from homelessness, Mark, the mayor has endorsed you.
Yes.
What's one issue that you disagree with her on?
One issue where I disagree with the mayor is on the sugar beverage tax. Primarily because I've been to Southeast Youth and Family Services and I've seen their Parent Plus program, and knowing that those kids that are served, those families that are served, the fact that they're employing people as a result of that program, and that program is funded by the sugar beverage tax. So when I see a program that is actually benefiting people and doing what it's intended to do, I don't want to take those funds away from that intended purpose. If we have budget shortfalls, we can find other measures or other methods, other revenues within the existing budget to make up for those.
Tammy, you could probably anticipate this one. What's an issue that you agree with the mayor on?
I can take that one too.
I know there is one because I read something recently and I went, oh, I'm on board with that, but now I can't remember what it is. You know, I will say that in the main, I feel like we aren't getting the kind of leadership that we thought we were going to get. And what I mean by that is that this is generally a very progressive city. This is a city that acknowledges that people have, deserve basic dignity and basic rights. And there are just things that she is doing that in my mind feel, very punitive, that feel very much looking at carceral solutions to things where we should be looking instead for ways to serve our neighbors, for ways to provide access to resources, to sort of democratize access to power in the city. And I'm finding more often than I had hoped that the decisions,
Tammy.
the kind of decisions she's making are leading in the wrong direction.
With all due respect, you didn't answer the question. What is one
Yes.
issue that you agree with her on?
I can't think of one right now. But if I get back, I'll get back to you if I think of it.
Okay.
This is a question from the audience. We're going to do this occasionally. This person asked, can you talk about your approach to negotiation, politicking and persuasion? P.S. Are your council colleagues going to push you around? So since Mark started last, Tammy, why don't we start with you?
Are my council colleagues going to push me around? I certainly hope not. I think one thing that isn't, a lot of folks don't know is that I used to serve as a legislative director in Texas. I worked for a House member from Houston who served on the Appropriations Committee, who served on the Public Health Committee. And when I worked for him, my one job for a session was to make sure a bill that he had been trying to pass for 10 years on mental health insurance parity, my job that session was to pass that bill. To help him pass the bill. And so that meant that I really had to work with the insurance industry, with mothers parents whose children were suffering from mental illness, with the National Alliance for Mental Illness, with all of the stakeholders who were for or against changing the insurance code to require that people have access to treatment and to services. I think what I learned from that is that it's really important that you bring people together, that you're willing to listen, even if you might be approaching something from opposite directions or if there's just flat out disagreement.
Thank you,
It's
Tammy.
important to do that, and I was able to do it under a Republican administration. It's when George Bush was governor.
Thank you.
Mark?
Okay, so will I be pushed around by my council colleagues? I retired from the Air Force as Lieutenant Colonel. I commanded people in combat zones. You don't get to that level by being pushed around. My focus is on working in collaboration, working in partnership. I've been able to bring people that disagree on a number of different levels together at the same table towards a common goal, and that's my focus. If we've got a goal in front of us, how do we work together to get there? When I was able to get the Washington ceasefire and the Second Amendment Foundation to sit down and agree on something regarding gun violence, I count that as a win. And it's that spirit of cooperation and working in partnership that I intend to bring to City Council. Working together with my colleagues, we can get things done.
In 2016, then Mayor Ed Murray proposed allowing duplexes and triplexes on every lot in Seattle. Minneapolis recently, people sort of frame it as eliminated single-family zoning, but it was essentially that proposal. Given that the mandatory housing affordability discussions have basically wrapped up, is that a next step for the city to take? Is that something that you would support? Start with you, Mark.
I actually support transit-oriented development and concentrating our growth in and around transit nodes so that people have access to transportation, shopping, and other amenities, because I also want to preserve the character of a lot of our neighborhoods. Doing an upzone in the Seward Park where the multi-story building goes up, that's not consistent with the character of the neighborhood. When we have plans for transit-oriented development like the North Rainier Valley plan, with accessible Mount Baker, that plan is sitting there waiting to be implemented, and the city has done nothing on it. It's sitting on the shelf. Let's take it off the shelf and actually build that, because that'll create a lot of workforce housing, transportation options, and connections to folks in the community.
And so is the answer to the question that I asked about duplexes and triplexes, it sounds like no was your answer?
Correct.
Tammy.
Good.
So I'm trained as a planner, and so I am somebody who believes that we need to increase density. The thing is, people hate density, but they also hate sprawl, right? We don't want to be moving into our farmland and further out in the county. And so the way we address the fact that we've got a lot of people moving here is that we have to go up. So while I agree that transit-oriented development is one option and something that we are doing, it's not the only option. And I live in Seward Park. I have a detached accessory dwelling unit. We have a little garage apartment. It doesn't make the character of our street any worse. I'm happy to have it. I'm hoping that my parents move in eventually. I have a feeling they will be there sooner than I thought. So it is important that we provide this sort of, Mike O'Brien calls it gentle density, but it really is a way to increase options for people, to make sure that there are small apartments for students, for elders, for people who are downsizing, empty nesters. It's an important tool, and it's something that we need to consider, and yes, I do support changing it.
So just a little broader question, kind of related in the same vein, of a particular importance in District 2, it's gentrification kind of an issue hanging over everything. How do you absorb growth and avoid displacement? What can be done now to address that? And Tammy, we'll start with you.
Sure. So I have been working with a coalition of organizations called South Core, Communities Organizing for Racial Equity. And we have proposed to council kind of a comprehensive anti-displacement strategy. Part of that includes things like mandatory inclusionary zoning, so that in the future, we require that apartment buildings have some mix of affordable units in them, and not just studios, but family-size apartments, units for people who have mobility issues, so that they have, ADA compliant. We also have been talking about a community development authority, a citywide community development authority. So we move surplus city land into this authority, into community land trust, so that we can increase permanent affordable housing, whether it's for home ownership or for rental. And that would also include permanent affordability for small businesses, so that our small businesses stop getting pushed out of the city. We know that displacement is happening. The city knew this was happening, and they did nothing to mitigate, so it's time for us to correct that error.
Thank you, Tammy.
Thank you. Mark?
I've seen the displacement of our neighbors. I've seen the displacement of my community. And I am dedicated to pushing back on that. So whether we do it through making sure that our seniors take advantage of the tax exemptions, that our veterans can take advantage of the tax exemptions that are available to them, I want to do that. When it comes to supporting our businesses, when a business is being pushed out because of a building being upzoned, and the commercial space that's available for them to go back into isn't to scale, I want to see more things like what happened with the Claremont at Rainier and Walden, where you have commercial space condos, so that businesses that were displaced actually have a space that they can come back into. I'm looking at something like the community preference policy, so that those who are displaced from development actually have a chance at the first right to come back in. So I am committed to pushing back on displacement. I don't want to see our neighbors and our businesses displaced. I want them to stay where they are so they can thrive, and I'm looking at every mechanism we can in order to make that happen.
Thank you, Mark. And this is a question that came from one of our fine audience members. How do we ensure small businesses, the fabric of our community, don't get displaced because of expensive developments?
And that goes back to what I was just talking about with the with the commercial condos, so that you have spaces that are built to scale, so that they don't have to do so much tenant improvements, so they can afford to move in. I'm also looking at a business retention and expansion program to not only expand the businesses that are there, but bring more business, more clients and customers to that business. I want to see us develop like some tax credits to provide for commercial space lease rates, to provide incentives for the property owner to keep those rent rates down, because one of the things that our communities are facing, our businesses are facing, is being priced out because of stair-stepping rents. Let's see what we can do to stabilize those rents in those businesses, so those businesses can stay and flourish. And there's also a community first development program where individual businesses can take advantage and buy their own buildings and lease those out to other small businesses so they can thrive.
Tammy, would you like to respond?
Sure. I think one of the things we need to do is sort of revamp our Office of Economic Development. So we have talked about commercial rent control to make sure that businesses stop getting pushed out. Down in Rainier Beach, where I work, there are lots of ethnic restaurants and small grocers that are getting pushed out. We know that that's happening even further south in the city. But I think that our Office of Economic Development really doesn't focus as much as they could on supporting small business. So one of the things I would like to do is invest in increasing the budget in OED so that they can support small business accelerators. I mentioned already the Community Preservation Authority, where the city could act as a master leaser, for example, and own the lease and lease to small businesses at a more affordable rate. That helps ensure longer-term affordability for small businesses. And really just prioritize our legacy businesses. I know there's some legislation at council already making sure that businesses that have been historically, that are in our neighborhoods, are able to get the support that they need to be able to stay in the city.
Thanks, Tam. We're going to move to transportation now. Some questions on that.
Should public transportation be free? And if yes, how do you propose making that happen? I'll start with you, Tammy.
I would love for it to be free. I know the county gets really cranky when city council candidates say that. And so I think one way that could happen is for us to support more Orca passes for employees. So asking our large employees to provide at least 50% subsidy to their employees, because they are the ones who are bringing people downtown, especially, I'm thinking especially of the congestion that's happening downtown. So while I would love to see us get to a place where transit is free and that we are publicly subsidizing it, I think right now, we are part of our campaign is supporting what Transit Riders Union has been advocating for, to have large employers in the city provide at least a 50% subsidy to their employees so that we start to begin down that path.
Thanks. Mark?
We already have free ORCA for our students. We have reduced ORCA or reduced fares for our seniors. And many of our large employers, even our nonprofit organizations, are providing free transit passes for their employees. For those who want to take advantage of that program and are eligible for the subsidies, yes, we should do that. But to make it free for everyone, at some point we have to pay for it. And that's my concern, is that if we keep going free transit, free transit, free transit, who is eventually going to wind up paying for that? And it's probably not going to be the corporations, it's probably going to be us. So yes, let's encourage our companies, our employers, to provide those subsidies. As I said, many of them already do. But let's also be fiscally responsible so that those who can afford to pay do pay their share.
Studies have shown that fare enforcement often impacts low-income and often homeless people the most. Is this an issue that you feel needs addressing, and if so, how? And Mark, we'll start with you.
When I saw that students returning to Rainier Beach High School, or returning to school, were being stopped and, I would say, harassed because of non-payment of fare, they hadn't had a chance to go to the school to get their ORCA cards yet. So that is something that I do take into consideration. Any fare enforcement has the potential of harming people. So yeah, I am concerned about that. And I want to make sure that there's no disproportionality in how those fares are enforced. And that's my concern, is that there is disproportionality, and we need to address that.
Tammy, do you want to respond or answer the question? Sorry.
Sure. So clearly we do have a problem. We all know that it is typically black and brown people who get targeted for fare enforcement. I ride the light rail fairly often. I'm on the bus, and that's who's getting asked for their ORCA card or for their pass. So we know that it's a problem, and honestly, that is a big reason why there has been so much push for free fares, because we need to reduce the fare for folks, and we need to start working toward making it easier and removing the barriers for people to get around the city the way they need to. But even without that, even without the free transit issue, I just don't think that is a way for us to be spending our resources. We could be investing, instead of paying for fare enforcement, we could be investing that money in subsidizing passes instead. So, again, when we start looking at these sort of punitive measures for how we treat our neighbors, when we start thinking of carceral solutions to our society's problems, I think that's the wrong way to go, and we should be looking at how we can invest that to better serve people instead.
Thank you.
So I'm going to go to a question about bike lanes. And this question is going to start with one of our questions, and it's going to go to an audience question. But the first question is, does Seattle need more bike lanes, particularly in District 2? Why or why not? And if so, where? We'll start with you, Tammy.
Yes, we do. And I'm really excited to hear that the council will be considering an ordinance that requires bike lanes to be built if they're already in the plan, in the bike master plan. Look, we need to be thinking about the safety of everybody in this city, not just people who drive. And in this part of town especially, where we have no real commuter path for people who bike to get to work. My kids would like to be able to ride their bikes to school, but I don't let them because I don't feel that they will be safe. We need to be prioritizing the safety of everybody, people who walk, people who drive, people who bike, and stop thinking about everything as just how we move cars through our city faster. So I do think that we need more bike lanes. I think that some commuter path is important. Rainier makes me nervous just because there are some parts of it that are so narrow. I don't know how we would get it in there. So we can look at Beacon Ave. But we also need more east-west paths. I know the folks in Georgetown are looking for how to get to South Park. Folks in Beacon Hill are trying to figure out how to get around their neighborhoods.
Right.
So there's a lot of work to do.
Thanks, Tammy. Mark, would you like to respond?
One of the things that I've been hearing as I've been knocking on doors is people actually don't see bikers using the bike lanes. And so when I look at the project that was on Wilson Avenue and how that came about, when I look at what's going up from MLK up to Beacon along Columbia, and again, I'm hearing from neighbors that bike lanes are great, but who's using them? Who's using them in those two months out of the year?
I use them.
Okay.
I use them. I think I ride a car.
Okay, if I may finish. What I'm hearing from the people that I'm talking to is there needs to be balance. I agree. We need to make sure we do anything we can to make it safer for people to walk, bike, and be out and about. But I think there needs to be a balance.
So I think, Mark, that takes us to the next part of this question. This is an audience-asked question. What are you going to do to make biking safer in South Seattle, especially on Beacon Hill and Rainier Avenue?
Okay. Well, as we look at where the bike lanes are going to go, let's look at the usage, because I'm also looking at the usage along Albro, Swift Albro, and how those bike lanes are designed. Those seem to be a good fit for that particular area. Let's make sure that when we do put in the lanes, they're doing it in a responsible way that acknowledges the actual usage of those lanes.
Tammy, would you like to respond?
Look, we have some greenways in the South End. They are heavily used, and the reason we don't see people riding bikes is because it's not safe for them to ride bikes. We need bike lane. There are lots of women who would like to ride bikes, but they need to get their kids around. Well, I shouldn't just say women, but there are people who try to get their children around, try to buy groceries, and some folks are doing that. We do see some cargo bikes, but they're doing it, taking their lives into their own hands, honestly. And so we will start to see more people riding when it is easier and safer for people to be riding. So I think it's a false choice to say that we shouldn't have bike lanes because people aren't riding. In terms of what's happening on Wilson Avenue, that was already a greenway. It just wasn't painted. So to say that that somehow is creating big problems is just false. That has been a bike lane, a bike path, forever. On the weekends, there are, sponsored cyclists riding from there down to Renton all the time. Yeah. It's just that now they have the safety of paint and planters.
And Tammy, we get it that it's dangerous to ride bikes. I mean, it's dangerous to ride bikes in a lot of places, but the question was, how are you going to make it safer? Because people do want to ride bikes.
I'm going to make sure that we actually build the bike lanes that we say we're going to build. We have a bike master plan. We have plans. We can't just pay for the design of these and not actually build them. We need to build them. We've had a master plan for years. It keeps getting, the funding for it keeps getting removed. So I would, make sure that whenever roads are getting torn up, if there is a bike lane that was already intended for that road, that we require that bike lane get built.
May I respond to that? Or
you go ahead and respond. Yeah.
Okay. No, what I'm saying is that there has to be a balance. Okay. Not that we don't need bike lanes. I'm saying there needs to be a balance.
There is no balance right now. It is all about cars.
I get that. That's what I'm calling for, a balance.
All right, we're going to move on to the next topic. Shifting gears. Thank you both, though, for your passionate responses. Okay, this one may get an interesting response, too.
Okay.
Would Seattle benefit from a safe drug consumption site? Why or why not? Let's start with you, Mark.
No, I don't believe it will. And when I was asked about this question before, do you support a safe injection site? Yeah, I said, that's something I struggle with because I do believe in harm reduction. I'm just looking for a better solution than a safe injection site. And one of the things that I've come across that I feel is a better option is the Safe Station program that Tacoma just recently rolled out, where someone who wants treatment can come in and get treatment. My focus is getting people the treatment services that they need right then and there without having to wait 3 or 4 weeks for an appointment. So I would favor that approach over a safe injection site because I've talked to addicts in recovery and I've asked them, what do you think? And they go, there may be some life-saving benefits, but it's not helping people change their behavior. And I get back to what is the goal? The goal is to get people treatment. The goal is to help people move forward. And I look at the Safe Station approach as a viable option for that.
All right, thank you, Mark.
Oh, and then Tammy, please, would you like to respond?
Yes, I do think that it is worth investigating. I would like to see it. We can give it a try. We know that medical research, medical professionals, social service professionals all think that this is something that needs to happen. Not just because it provides a safe space for people. We're not providing them the drugs. We're just providing them a safe space so that if they OD, or to prevent OD, overdose, this is about life-saving alternatives. It's about making sure that if somebody is at risk, there is a medical professional who can provide service and save them. It's also about creating access to the services that they need if they're interested in seeking treatment. And not everybody will be ready the first time, but if they come back and know that that is an option, then that's how you start to move people into actually seeking the treatment that they need. So I think it's an important strategy for us to try. And it is intended to be harm reduction. It is intended to save lives, and that in itself is a reason to give it a try.
Thank you.
Tammy. We're going to move a little bit to policing. We're going to kind of move quickly here, but many of the people arrested in Seattle, as you well know, are so-called repeat offenders and in and out of jail, often struggling with mental illness and or chemical dependency. Last week, the city and county unveiled a plan to address this by funding more shelter beds, probation officers, several other steps. Some of the public defense community say this is just more money for a criminal justice system that is failing. How do you suggest the city helps stop this cycle, and what are some specific policy tools you would employ to accomplish this? I'll start with you, Tammy.
So the reason many of these people are cycling through is because these are the chronically homeless folks that we hear about. These are the folks we see on the street. They are the hardest to serve. Very often they might be arrested, but they are declared incompetent to stand trial. And the only option is to try to release them to Harborview, at which point they become under the jurisdiction of the county, or to release them to the street. So the way we stop that, because we are not going to arrest our way out of this problem, especially if we're talking about this particular population, the way we stop that is by providing services, by providing access to housing, by providing resources for the social service providers to connect them to treatment, to shelter beds. If we have more actual housing available, like the Estelle, which is a great example of permanent supportive housing that provides a place for people to be. They're actually even starting a project with Harborview so that when some of that release happens, there is a place for them to go.
All right, thank you, Tammy.
So there are other things that we can do besides just continue to arrest people.
Okay, Mark?
One of the encouraging things about that approach is the assignment of public health nurses to help with this population, the assignment of specific prosecutors or attorneys to oversee the program. We definitely need to do more with this population, and they are some of the hardest to serve. I will agree with you. They are some of the hardest to serve. And just cycling in and out of jail is not fixing their problems. That's why I come back to LEAD as an option, the VITAL program as an option, drug court has been as a particular options. Let's help people change their own circumstance, and you do that by providing the case management and resources that they need. Cycling in and out of jail, again, let's go back to one of my focuses, which is prevention. How do we prevent that from happening in the first place? And then what can we do to intervene to interrupt that cycle? And I think that's a smarter approach than, as been said, we can't arrest our way out of this problem. We definitely need to serve people who are in that situation.
All right, thank you, Mark. I want to move on to you guys being able to question yourselves for a second here. You'll question one another. You have a short time to do this because we're kind of running low on time here. You'll have 30 seconds to ask a question, 60 seconds to respond. Mark, would you ask Tammy the first question?
The question I have is that when we were asked about safe injection sites, and this happened at the GSBA forum, and the question was asked, where? Where would you put it? You really didn't have a specific answer for that, and I'd like to find out from you, where in D2 would you put a safe injection site?
I guess I would say that we need to put it near other services. So there are, down on Airport Way, there are kind of across the street from the, whatever the office supply store is there are already some social services available. And so, you know, I think wherever we put it, it needs to be co-located with additional services for the people who are going to be taking advantage of that, and so that they aren't just isolated in a part of the district where there are no other services, there's no access to, you know, grocery stores or other housing. It needs to be where people can take advantage of kind of this co-location.
So if I could ask a follow-up question, you had said near healthcare facilities, if you would. So I'm thinking about the healthcare facilities that are in Rainier Beach, Columbia City, Hillman City, and North Beacon Hill. So are you saying then you want a safe injection site in those areas that are primarily residential neighborhoods?
No, I'm saying I think down by in the off of Airport Way, where there are other kinds of services that they could use, might be a good spot for something like that.
Okay.
Tammy, would you like to ask Mark a question?
Sure. Sorry, put these back on. So you, on your website, talk a lot about the city council needing to be accountable, about needing to increase accountability with regards to the budget. Can you talk about how you would hold yourself accountable to the community when we bargain police accountability in 2020?
Well, I hold myself accountable to the people of this community every day. I am not a member of SPOG. I am not a sworn police officer. I am a union member. So when you're talking about how am I going to hold myself accountable, I hold myself accountable by interactions with each and every one of these people so that if I don't perform, they let me know. My commitment is being accessible, accountable, and responsive to the people of this community. That's what I intend to do on city council. And when it comes to accountability for police officers, I agree, there needs to be accountability. There is accountability. And I think what you're trying to get at—
The federal judge says there is no accountability right now.
If you will let me finish my point. The disagreement about police accountability that I objected to was they wanted to reopen a contract that had already been negotiated in good faith.
Thank you, Mark. Our time is dissolved. It's gone. We can't get it back. But you will get a chance to speak here in just a second. We're going to do our closing statements now, so you guys will get an opportunity to respond however you want. So thanks so much, guys, for being here tonight. We're going to move to closing statements now. You have 90 seconds, and Tammy, we're going to start with you.
Oh, I thought I was going last.
Yeah, she gets the last one because he went first.
Climate change.
So you were right. Mark, you go ahead and start.
Okay. Again, I do thank you all for being here tonight. And I want to let you know that I am committed to working for you. When I started this campaign, it was started with one primary goal in mind: prioritizing the people of District 2. I am committed to working for you, and just to put it bluntly, you deserve a city council that's going to listen to you, that's going to seek your input, that's going to include you in the decisions that impact this community. And right now, we don't seem to have that on city council. I have a history of working in collaboration and partnership to get things done for the people in this community. And I am committed to doing that for you. As we talked about, being accessible, accountable, and responsive to you. That's what I bring. Working in collaboration and partnership to get things done for the people in our community. That's what I bring. I have the experience, I have the knowledge, and I have the determination to work with you to make things better. I wake up every day thinking about how can I make things better? What can I do? And I know that we can do it working in partnership. That's the spirit of leadership that I will bring to Seattle City Council. Partnership, collaboration, and a focus on getting things done, because right now, there's a lot of talk, there's a lot of arguing, there's a lot of pushing individual agendas. Let's actually get some things done for the people in our district. That's my focus.
Thank you, Mark. Tammy, your closing statement.
Well, thank you all for being here tonight. I got into this race to talk about building community wealth, to move the city toward more action on increasing racial equity, on increasing job opportunities, on preserving affordability for families and for small businesses. But the truth is that this election cycle has become about so much more than just this race in District 2. We know that wealth isn't created by self-made people with power in the free market. Wealth creation is a collective effort, but that effort is hampered when there is undue corporate influence at City Hall. We need to shift economic control of the city back to the people of our community so that we can create jobs to build thousands of units of green, affordable housing, green jobs for bus drivers and bus mechanics, for health workers, so that we can ensure that we reduce climate pollution and protect the people who are working in those sectors. This is what's at stake in this election. We need a different kind of economy. We need one that delivers good lives and good livelihoods to our neighbors, that sustains our ecological systems and protects the earth. We need to work together to demand investments in green infrastructure, to demand a commitment to fair labor practices, to demand increase to vocational training, and to demand racial equity in the city. That's how we build power for the people in our city. That's how we build healthy communities. And that's how we build a caring economy that works for all of us. My commitment to you is to focus my energy on building power for our neighbors so we can achieve the vision of a more just Seattle, and I'm here to ask for your support tonight so we can get that done.
All right, everybody, let's hear it for District 2 Council candidates Tammy Morales and Mark Solomon. And that completes tonight's debate. Thank you so much for watching Seattle City Club's District 2 Seattle City Council debate. And thank you to presenting sponsor Amazon, supporting sponsor AARP, and host sponsor Rainier Arts Center for making this all possible. You guys have a great night.